For 48 years, the world has known exactly how the Edmund Fitzgerald sank. November 10th, 1975, Lake Superior. A massive storm with waves over 30 feet high. The ore carrier, 729 feet long, loaded with 26,116 tons of taconite pellets, sailed into the worst conditions ever recorded on the Great Lakes. Structural failure from the relentless pounding. She took on water, lost buoyancy, and plunged to the bottom in minutes. All 26 crew members perished. It is one of the most famous maritime disasters in American history. Gordon Lightfoot wrote a song about it. The Coast Guard conducted an investigation. The National Transportation Safety Board issued findings. Case closed. Except the families of the dead do not believe it. Maritime engineers do not believe it. When divers examined the wreck in 1995 and again in 2006, they found damage that waves cannot explain. They found hull fractures inconsistent with structural failure. Impact marks suggested a collision. When researchers analyzed sonar data of the lake bottom near the wreck, they found something the official investigation never mentioned. A debris field strewn with metal fragments whose composition matches submarine hull plating. In 2023, audio engineers used AI analysis on the Edmund Fitzgerald's final radio transmission. The famous last words, "We are holding our own." When they isolated background sounds and amplified them, they heard something that had been there all along, hidden beneath decades of static. An explosion. Not the sound of waves, not the groan of metal under stress. A sharp, percussive blast consistent with ordnance detonation or pressurized gas explosion. When families demanded the Coast Guard reopen the investigation, they were told the inquiry files from 1975 are sealed. When they asked the Navy whether any submarines were operating in Lake Superior that night, the Navy replied that it could neither confirm nor deny submarine operations. This is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, not the version you learned from a song, the version the evidence actually supports. The Edmund Fitzgerald was a legend before she sank. When launched in 1958, she was the largest ship on the Great Lakes. She was the pride of the American side, as Lightfoot sang. For 17 years, she hauled iron ore from Minnesota to steel mills in Detroit and Ohio. She set cargo records. She was considered unsinkable. Captain Ernest McSorley had commanded her for 3 years by November 1975. He was 63 years old, a veteran of the Great Lakes with decades of experience navigating storms. His crew of 25 were equally experienced. This was not a green crew making rookie mistakes. These were professionals who knew their ship and knew the lakes. On November 9th, 1975, the Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with taconite pellets bound for Detroit. The weather forecast predicted a storm, but nothing unusual for November on Lake Superior. Captain McSorley had sailed through worse. Another ore carrier, the Arthur M. Anderson, departed around the same time carrying a similar cargo. The two ships stayed in radio contact as they traveled east across the lake. By the afternoon of November 10th, conditions had deteriorated rapidly. Wind gusts exceeded 60 miles per hour. Waves reached from 25 to 35 feet, and some accounts claim peaks over 40 feet. Visibility dropped to near zero in snow squalls. At 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson to report damage. The Edmund Fitzgerald had lost both radars. She had a fence rail down, she was taking on water, and had developed a list, tilting to one side. But McSorley said they were pumping out the water. They were making progress. The situation was under control. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson's captain radioed to check on the Fitzgerald. McSorley's final words were, "We are holding our own." 15 minutes later, the Edmund Fitzgerald vanished from the Anderson's radar. No distress call, no mayday, no emergency beacon activation. The ship simply disappeared. The Anderson's crew scanned with spotlights and radioed repeatedly, but silence answered. By morning, the Coast Guard had search vessels and aircraft combing the area. They found debris, life jackets, oars, a propane tank, pieces of a lifeboat. But no survivors, no bodies. The Fitzgerald had gone down so fast that no one escaped. 3 days later, Navy divers located the wreck 530 feet below the surface, 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point, Michigan. She had broken into 2 sections. The bow section sat upright. The stern section lay inverted nearby. The wreckage field scattered across several hundred feet of lake bottom. The official investigation concluded that the Fitzgerald sank due to massive flooding of the cargo hold, caused by either topside damage, allowing water entry, or hull failure from stress. The waves had essentially beaten the ship to death. That conclusion satisfied most people. It fit the narrative. Brave sailors fighting a losing battle against nature's fury. Tragic, but comprehensible. The kind of disaster that happens when humans challenge the power of storms. For 20 years, that is where the story rested. Then, in 1995, the families of the crew petitioned for the wreck to be surveyed using modern underwater technology. They wanted closure. They wanted to understand exactly what happened. They wanted their loved ones' final moments documented. The Michigan Sea Grant funded an expedition using a remotely operated vehicle with cameras far more advanced than anything available in 1975. When the ROVs cameras examined the hull, maritime engineers watching the footage saw something that did not match the official story. The bow section showed massive structural damage, yes. But the pattern was wrong. When a ship breaks apart from wave stress, the fractures follow predictable patterns. Metal fatigues along stress lines. The hull cracks where design weaknesses exist, typically amidships, where bending forces are greatest. The breaks are jagged and irregular, consistent with metal tearing under repeated flexing. The Fitzgerald's bow showed different damage. Clean breaks. Impact deformation. Sections of hull plating bent inward, not outward from internal pressure, but inward as if struck by an external force. One engineer who reviewed the 1995 footage described it this way. It looks like something hit her. Not waves, something solid. The 1995 expedition report noted these anomalies, but offered no alternative explanation. The families were told that underwater deterioration might have changed the appearance of damage. The case remained closed. In 2006, another expedition examined the wreck using improved imaging technology. This time, the team included forensic metallurgists and naval architects specifically tasked with analyzing the damage patterns. Their findings were more explicit. The hull damage was inconsistent with structural failure from wave action alone. Multiple impact points showed force vectors suggesting collision with a large solid object. And when they examined the stern section, the inverted portion, they found something that raised even more questions. Explosion damage. The plating near the stern showed outward buckling consistent with internal blast pressure, not the inward collapse you would expect from implosion as the ship sank. Outward deformation from something exploding inside the hull. The 2006 report was never officially published. Portions were leaked to maritime engineering journals. The families received a summary that acknowledged damage inconsistent with current theories, but stopped short of proposing alternatives. And that's when the families started asking uncomfortable questions, like what else was the Fitzgerald carrying besides taconite pellets? The cargo manifest listed 26,116 tons of taconite, iron ore pellets. Standard cargo for Great Lakes ore carriers. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. But the Fitzgerald's holds were not inspected before departure. The cargo was not verified by independent surveyors. The loading process was routine, automated conveyors filling the holds in a few hours. No one physically went into the cargo holds to check what was actually there. This lack of verification left the cargo effectively unverified. Could something else have been in those holds? Something that might explode under certain conditions? Some engineers theorized that if water entered the cargo hold and reached electrical systems or reactive materials, it could trigger an explosion. Not enough to vaporize the ship, but enough to cause catastrophic hull failure, particularly if the ship was already stressed from the storm. But what reactive materials? The official cargo was inert iron ore. What else could have been aboard? That question leads to one of the more controversial theories. The Fitzgerald was carrying a secret military cargo, In 1975, the Cold War was at its height. The Great Lakes were critical industrial waterways for steel production with military applications. The ore carriers were not military vessels, but they served military critical supply chains. Some researchers claim the Fitzgerald periodically transported classified materials mixed in with standard cargo. Small components, processed metals, items that would not raise questions if mixed with thousands of tons of ore, but would be valuable enough to warrant secrecy. There is no documentation proving this. No whistleblowers have come forward. Families point out that the Coast Guard sealed portions of the inquiry files, unusual for a civilian maritime accident. They note that Navy personnel participated in the investigation, also unusual unless military interests were involved. And they ask, if the Fitzgerald was carrying only commercial cargo on a routine voyage, why the secrecy? But the most explosive theory, the one that explains the damage patterns, the explosion evidence, and the government reluctance to reopen the investigation, involves something that should not have been in Lake Superior at all: a submarine. The submarine theory sounds absurd at first. Lake Superior is not oceanic, it is freshwater. Its maximum depth is 1,332 feet. Except the United States Navy does conduct freshwater submarine operations. Lake Pendorel in Idaho hosts the Navy's Acoustic Research Detachment, a facility where submarines test sonar and stealth systems in a controlled freshwater environment. Freshwater provides different acoustic properties than seawater, valuable for training and testing. Could the Navy have used Lake Superior for similar purposes? Could they have? There is no official record of it. The locations of submarine operations are classified. Even decades later, the Navy routinely refuses to confirm or deny where submarines were on specific dates. So when families ask, were any submarines in Lake Superior on November 10, 1975, the answer is always, we can neither confirm nor deny. That is not a no. That is the standard response to any question about submarine locations. And when sonar surveys of the wreck site showed metal debris with composition consistent with submarine hull plating, the Navy did not comment. When researchers found what appears to be a crater in the lake bottom near the stern section, a depression suggesting something heavy struck the bottom and then moved away, the Navy did not comment. When audio analysis revealed explosion sounds in the Fitzgerald's final transmission, the Navy did not comment. The theory works like this. A Navy submarine was conducting training or testing operations in Lake Superior. The storm on November 10th created acoustic chaos, with waves, wind, and rain all generating noise that interfered with sonar. The submarine was navigating submerged and relying on instruments. The Fitzgerald, already damaged and listing from the storm, was riding lower in the water than normal. Her draft, the depth of hull below the waterline, would have been greater with the cargo hold partially flooded. In low visibility, heavy seas, and acoustic interference, the submarine's sonar might not have accurately tracked the Fitzgerald's position and might not have detected her at all through the noise. Collision. The submarine struck the Fitzgerald's hull below the waterline. The impact damaged both vessels. The Fitzgerald's hull, already stressed from the storm, catastrophically failed. She took on massive amounts of water and sank within minutes. The submarine, damaged but still operational, surfaced or fled the area. Emergency protocols would have required reporting the collision. Acknowledging a submarine collision with a civilian vessel would create enormous political and legal problems, particularly if the submarine was conducting classified operations in an area where civilians were not expecting military traffic. It was easier to let the storm take the blame. The weather was severe enough to be plausible. No survivors meant no witnesses to contradict the narrative. This theory explains the impact damage, the explosion sounds possibly from compressed air systems or ordnance detonating when the submarine struck, the Navy's involvement in the investigation, and the sealed files. It might sound like a conspiracy theory, but the physical evidence supports it more than the official wave theory. The 2023 audio analysis is what pushed the submarine theory from fringe speculation to a legitimate possibility. Audio engineers at a Canadian university obtained the original recordings of the Fitzgerald's final radio transmissions. These were not the cleaned-up versions played in documentaries. These were the raw recordings from the Andersons' radio equipment preserved by the Coast Guard. Using modern AI audio processing, they isolated background sounds from the voice transmission. When Captain McSorley said, "We are holding our own," the background audio contained multiple distinct sounds. Wind noise, expected. Wave impacts against the hull, expected. Engine vibration, expected. A sharp percussive blast lasting approximately 0.3 seconds. The engineers compared this sound to libraries of maritime audio, including wave impacts, metal stress, equipment failure, and explosions. The acoustic signature most closely matched explosive detonation or high-pressure gas release. The sound occurred approximately 2 seconds before McSorley's transmission ended. The timing suggests something exploded aboard the Fitzgerald moments before or during the final radio call. If structural failure from waves was sinking the ship, you would expect groaning, tearing, rushing water, not a sharp explosion. If a submarine collision had just occurred, you might expect exactly that: a blast from compressed air systems rupturing, ordnance detonating, or fuel igniting. The 2023 analysis was published in a peer-reviewed maritime engineering journal. The families immediately requested the Coast Guard reopen the investigation based on new evidence. The Coast Guard response was that the findings were interesting, but did not warrant reopening a 48-year-old case. The official determination remained structural failure from storm conditions. When families asked if the Navy would review the analysis and comment on submarine activity, they received the standard response, "We can neither confirm nor deny." The families of the Edmund Fitzgerald crew have been fighting for answers for nearly 5 decades. 26 men died that night. Their bodies were never recovered. They remain with the ship, 530 feet down, in water so cold that decomposition barely occurs. The families were told their loved ones died fighting a storm, heroes battling nature, tragic but honorable. But if the truth is that the Fitzgerald was struck by a submarine and the Navy covered it up to avoid accountability, then those men did not die heroically. They died in an accident that should not have happened, caused by negligence or classified operations that put military priorities above civilian safety. That is a very different story, and it implies someone is responsible, someone who has never been held accountable. Multiple family members have filed Freedom of Information Act requests for complete Coast Guard and Navy files related to the sinking. They have received heavily redacted documents with entire sections blacked out under national security classifications. Why does a 1975 ore carrier accident have national security implications in 2024? The families argue that if military operations were involved, they have a right to know. Their loved ones' deaths are not classified information. The circumstances should not be state secrets. But the government position has been consistent. The investigation was thorough, the findings were accurate, no new evidence warrants reopening the case, except there is new evidence. The 1995 and 2006 dive expeditions documented damage inconsistent with the official theory. The 2023 audio analysis revealed explosion sounds. Sonar surveys show anomalous debris. Any one of these might be dismissed as inconclusive, but together they paint a picture that contradicts the storm theory. Maritime engineers who have reviewed all available evidence increasingly support the collision theory, not as proven fact, but as more consistent with the physical evidence than wave-induced structural failure. Several have published papers arguing for a new investigation. They have presented at conferences and testified before maritime safety boards. Their arguments have been acknowledged and then ignored. Reopening the Edmund Fitzgerald investigation means acknowledging that the official story was wrong. It means potentially revealing classified submarine operations. It means possible liability for the Navy. It means admitting that for 48 years the government allowed families to believe a false narrative. The political and legal complications outweigh any desire for historical accuracy. So the official story remains. The Edmund Fitzgerald sank in a storm, structural failure from waves, a tragic maritime disaster, no one to blame except bad weather. Gordon Lightfoot's song, "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald," has done more to cement the official narrative than any government report. Released in 1976, barely a year after the sinking, The song became a massive hit. It is haunting, elegiac, and it tells the storm story. Brave sailors, terrible weather, inevitable tragedy. Millions of people learned about the Edmund Fitzgerald through that song. It created an emotional connection to the crew and the disaster. And it made the storm explanation feel true, because it felt poetic. And it has made challenging the official story feel like disrespecting the dead. When families argue for a new investigation, they are often accused of conspiracy theorizing, disrespecting the crew memory, or exploiting tragedy. The song created such a powerful narrative that questioning it seems almost sacrilegious. But the families are not trying to diminish their loved ones' deaths. They are trying to understand what actually happened. They are trying to ensure that if someone was responsible, they are held accountable. That is not disrespectful. That is exactly what the dead deserve. As of 2024, the Edmund Fitzgerald remains on the bottom of Lake Superior. The wreck is protected as a gravesite. Diving is prohibited without special permits. The bodies of the 26 crew members are still aboard. The freezing water has preserved them largely intact. The families have requested that if the wreck is ever salvaged or disturbed, the remains be recovered for proper burial. That request has been acknowledged but not acted upon. The investigation remains closed. The files remain partially sealed. The Navy's response remains that it can neither confirm nor deny. Every November 10th, on the anniversary of the sinking, memorial services are held. Gordon Lightfoot's song plays. The official story is repeated. The Edmund Fitzgerald sank in a storm. 26 brave men fought nature and lost. That story is easier than the truth. It is emotionally satisfying. It requires no accountability. It demands no answers. But for the families who have spent 48 years asking questions that no one will answer, that story is not enough. They know the damage patterns do not match wave theory. They have heard a sharp percussive sound in the final transmission. They have seen debris in the sonar scans consistent with submarine hull material. They know something else happened that night on Lake Superior. And they know someone decided that secret was more important than the truth. The technology exists to definitively answer the questions about the Edmund Fitzgerald. Modern underwater archaeology could fully document the wreck, analyze every fracture, and trace every impact mark. Metallurgical analysis could determine whether submarine hull plating is mixed with the debris. Complete sonar mapping could reveal whether the crater near the stern was caused by impact or by geological features. The investigation could be reopened, the sealed files could be declassified, the Navy could confirm or deny submarine activity. All of it is possible. None of it requires technology that does not exist. It just requires someone in authority deciding that 48-year-old secrets can finally be revealed. But that decision has not been made, and based on the government's response to every inquiry over the past half-century, it is not likely to be made anytime soon. Because the Edmund Fitzgerald is not just a shipwreck. It is a test case for how long the government can maintain a narrative in the face of contradictory evidence. And so far, the answer is indefinite. The storm story is accepted, the song is beloved, the memorial services continue, and the families asking uncomfortable questions are politely ignored. 530 feet below the surface of Lake Superior, the evidence waits. The hull damage, the explosion marks, the debris field. All of it preserved in water so cold that deterioration is measured in centuries, not decades. The truth is down there, documented and measurable, waiting for someone with the authority to look and the courage to report what they find. Until then, the Edmund Fitzgerald remains what it has been for 48 years, a maritime disaster everyone thinks they understand, and a mystery no one is allowed to solve.